Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another Art for All group. Today, I'd like to introduce an artist that some of you may well have heard of before. So an exhibition of her work is currently on at the Arnolfini Gallery in Bristol, and they have an upcoming exhibition starting on the 3rd of July of the painter Frank Bowling. And I've featured some of his work in this group before, but I haven't, I don't think, talked about Joe Spence, who's the artist I'm going to talk about today. So in the future, I might go back to Frank Bowling, but today I'm going to look at Joe Spence. And as I said, some of you might know her work already. So she started her career assisting commercial photographers before quickly establishing her own agency specialising in weddings, family portraiture, and active portfolios. Her early experiences led to an acute understanding of the mechanics of photography, from the practical to more theoretical considerations. The early 70s saw Spence's work shift towards more interrogative and critical documentary mode, which articulated a desire to create photographs that ran counter to the idealised imagery offered by advertising. Alongside a prolific photographic practice, Spence maintained a career as an educator, writer, organiser, and broadcaster. For Spence, photography should be informative, and it should be noted that her emergence as a photographer paralleled an increasingly politicised art world. Here we can see an image of Joe Spence in a swimming pool, but it's blended with an image of a field, a ploughed field with things growing. And she blends with the earth, and the earth blends with the water. Following a diagnosis with breast cancer, much of Spence's subsequent work was a response to her treatment by the medical establishment and her attempt to navigate its authority through alternative therapies. In 1984, alongside Rosie Martin, Spence developed phototherapy, adopting techniques from counselling to invert the traditional relationship between the photographer and the subject. If historically the subject had little control over their own representation, phototherapy shifts this dynamic, enabling them to act out personal narratives and claim agency for their own biography. In 1990, after returning from work commitments abroad, Spence was diagnosed with leukemia, an illness that would claim her life in 1992. Up until her final moments, Spence was still probing at the potential of photography to articulate the unrepresentable. Her practice illustrates a way to connect her own intimacies and traumas to a broader public discourse. Affirmation for Spence was about visibility and autonomy, to say what you want to, when you want to. This is part of her series, Only When I Got to 50 Did I Realise I Was Cinderella. And here we can see Joe Spence holding up a sign saying, how do I give up responsibilities without being ill? Do less and stay well, but neglect my work. Do too much, then fall ill and be looked after. How do we navigate giving up responsibilities without making ourselves unwell? How do we hold our personal boundaries without having to say I'm ill so I can't do it? Or how can we just say I don't want to do it? Here we can see Joe acting out being Cinderella. Only when I got to 50 did I realise I was Cinderella. Why couldn't I speak before? Why did I have to go into therapy? And I think she's maybe saying, why do we act out roles? Why do we do what other people want us to do? Why is it so hard to express ourselves and express what we want until we finally realise that sometimes the structures we operate in aren't as important as we might have thought they once were. And maybe sometimes it takes illness for us to see that. Here we have Joe Spence acting out being a housewife in a former time and Here she's pretending to be a baby and satirising the idea of health professionals telling her what she should and shouldn't be doing, childlike and having to listen to doctors who know best. And this is perhaps her making a slightly rude gesture in a way towards the medical establishment. Here, she's playing with ideas of desire and femininity and the body and what happens to bodies once they become ill. So this is phototherapy, shame work, his desire, her trauma. And we can see that she's wearing this lacy negligee, but we can also see the scar of her biopsy. And what do we find desirable? What do we find shameful? Can you still be desirable if you've got a biopsy scar? Are people going to look away? Are people still going to want you to perform with femininity or masculinity when you may not feel you fit that mold? Or you do still feel you fit that mold, but other people decide you don't? She asks very interesting questions. And here we have phototherapy, the bride, from a phototherapy session on powerlessness. And here we have Jo Spence pretending to be back in school and how our school photographs change as we get older. How confident do we feel in them? What age are we in them? Phototherapy, late mother, or how to get beyond the stereotype. Jo dresses up as her own mother and inhabits the character, or doesn't inhabit the character. And this is one of my favourites, phototherapy from the series Hiding by Joking. And it's a strange image, perhaps quite funny, and somebody play acting, maybe almost acting the goat, but it references the idea in psychotherapy that humour is a mature defence against anxiety. There's a reason we have gallows humour. People in hospitals make jokes and laugh. People in the army make jokes and laugh. People who are ill make jokes and laugh because the alternative is sometimes to feel quite frightened and powerless. So here, Jo Spence taking a deep breath. And can you hide in jokes from fear? And here, Jo's really considering herself. I want to be useful. I want to be good, ? I want to use my mind. What can you still do when you're ill? What can you do? In this image on the left, Jo seems to be a child and considering her future. And here on the right, a failed Joan Collins. Where is my model for a healthy middle age? How do I face aging? So asking questions at the start of life, questions in the middle of life maybe. And what's it mean? On the left, an image of powerlessness, unhappy families, the effects of war. And then on the right, shall I marry and be secure? Who will look after me? What happens if I'm ill? Then an image of me taking control, integrating the rebellious with the wise side of me, diagnosing health by the condition of my tongue. So a bit of humour, and perhaps maybe slightly sticking her tongue out at other people deciding how well or not well, or mad or not mad she is. It's too much responsibility. I'm very tired and disillusioned. It's a good struggle. And finally, Can I transform others? Does it really matter? I want to be happy. I can transform myself. Maybe there's a slight feeling of over positivity in that, and she's dressed as a pretty fairy. There's also something quite hopeful as well. She does transform herself in all of her images into different characters, acts them out, and considers them. Thank you very much for joining today. You might have photographs of yourself in your past where you're acting out a certain part of you, or you might have a way in which you would like to be seen in a photograph. Maybe for this week, that's something to consider. How would you like to be seen in a photograph? Are there any photographs where you feel that an aspect of you really is seen? If you could take a photograph of someone else, what would you want to show of them? So thank you very much for joining today. Look forward to seeing you all again next week. Goodbye.